Just having a pre-show jog in Paris. About an hour and a half till showtime. It's nice to get out here and breathe a lot of air. I wrote something about performance today. It's sort of raining here. The opening door. Performance philosophy. I'll read some of it to you. These days, I do breath work and EFT tapping before hitting the stage. EFT tapping is this technique. You hit acupuncture points and you say something positive. You know, if you, for instance, I'll say, let me be the love, let me deliver the love from presence. Let me be funny. Let me be light. Let me draw the audience in. And most importantly, let me remember all my lyrics. So yeah, I do a little bit of that in conjunction with breath work right before I hit the stage. Like seeking the Father in the morning in a normal day, I employ the very same techniques right before I hit the stage. Deep breathing into the diaphragm for 2.5 minutes or so, into 1.5 minutes of breath holding where I'm consumed by silence and consciously being present, focusing energy in my third eye center and in a way disappearing altogether in a moment I call tiny eternities. I'm going to sit down under a roof. Yeah, so the breath work, tap into presence, do a little EFT. Basically, I'm sidelining my ego, and I'm letting myself know that the performance will not be coming from that side of my consciousness, but from presence. Touching the eternal source, praying to God for wisdom and to guide my steps when consciousness does arise. Before a performance, I pray to give light and then love to the love of the Lord to the crowd, to be a conduit. I also pray to be light and funny. I said all this, but I wrote it too. To draw the crowd in and to remember my lyrics. I utilize EFT, emotional freedom technique, during these moments as well, tapping on the center of my head, on the forehead, on the third eye, under my eye, on the cheek, right above my upper lip, on my chin, and then with a fist at the center of my chest, pounding like the warrior that I am. I just showed you that a little bit ago. I suppose this technique was designed to engage acupuncture points, and its reason for being effective is beyond my grasp. I just know that it is. Maybe it's psychosomatic. I don't know. I'm sure there's maybe EFT experts out there. You could say what it is in the comments below, why it works. Somehow it does seem to be very effective in terms of, and you know, I use it for performance, but if you want to just use it in your everyday life for like, help me be more confident, help me, whatever situation you might be dealing with, EFT I think is cool. Look into it. It's not a huge part of what I do. I just do it a couple times every now and again. So this combination of breath work and EFT is a more active form of meditation before a show than in my morning routine, but it's very similar to my morning routine. Morning is more just breath work and really focusing on presence. Sending a message to myself or my ego that he is to ride in the back seat, and the only thing I have to offer, energetically speaking, all comes from somewhere beyond me. So this is performance philosophy, basically. And where this, I think, gets interesting is the relationship to having an awakened state of consciousness and where the ego fits into that. Because I don't think the ego just goes off and dies, and I think the ego is necessary. So I'll get into that. I empathize with the crowd, and I think of their lives, the inevitable hardness of them, and the fact that they are there to experience a love that I am merely the conduit of. When I was younger, I was more unconscious of this dynamic and sought to be loved more than to love. I sought to receive more than to give. This led to many unhappy moments where my mind would bully me relentlessly and where I was affected by reality in unfortunate ways. The soul of music is powerful and more powerful than an ego's unconscious grip of the situation. So as a young person, I would often transcend this dynamic in spite of myself. I would become a conduit for a higher love or energy very often, in spite of my ego's firm grasp. I had no grasp consciously of this, though, compared to now. Yeah, so the power of music overwhelms people, I think, even when they are coming from the ego a lot of the times, because music's powerful. The gig last night, Sao Claude Terrace in La Abrasel, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, La Abrasel, La Bresle. It's an hour away from Clermont-Ferrand. The gig last night, it was all filmed by a professional TV crew, a small festival, 2 other performers going on before me, a small crowd of 250 or so. The energy and enthusiasm of the French audience is unmatched. Rapturous applause and screams between songs there, where they would often sing along. They make it easy. The French make it easy, at least for me. They love me here. It's a joy to perform in France. Vive la France! A performance really is an interesting field to observe the ego and spirit working together. This is kind of what I wanted to get into. Yes, you can call spirit or presence into a position of dominance beforehand, but in my case, I'm not simply going on stage and oming into a microphone, urging everyone to follow me into a group meditation. Om, Om. I do sometimes do that for a minute or so for comedic purposes. Performance for me, however, is deeply involved technically. Skills I've developed and evolved for years are all applied. Intense singing, such as intense singing, building beats and loops live. You ought to see me. Come out and see me play. Intricate guitar and remembering and delivering 2 hours of lyrical content. I was on stage for 2 hours last night. Which all means one can't just display a state of pure being in that situation, silently transmitting love. The ego needs to come to the party. The ego, so, you could try to be awakened and just pure being consciousness, but, well, I'll get to all that. So obviously the ego needs to be involved here. Transcendent moments happen during all this. And as I've done it for so long, it is relatively second nature at this point. But that said, it ain't spirit alone up there with me. And I believe this is an important aspect of what awakening actually is. My ideas about it versus the reality of its experience. The idea of awakening previous to this experience would have been more like complete ego disappearance, where one has fully transcended into a blissful state of pure being, and is needed to even be reminded of things like having a name at all or any kind of separate identity structure altogether. In many ways, I can see the ridiculous nature of this fantasy. Living here on the material plane, that is, and on the planet called Earth, which we still are right now, guys. We're still here on the planet called Earth. And it's not even that I believe those states of non-identity are impossible or even outside of our actual nature and perhaps real reality. I think ultimately only consciousness itself is eternal, and only what is eternal is actually real. All else is a transitory dream. But as long as we are having this human experience on the planet called Earth, we are, for this transitory moment, still within the confines of this dream to one degree or another, guys. Even if we're enlightened, we're still in the dream called Earth, as a dreamlike entity called a human. So the ego might not be our amigo, but we need him to come to the party. And our purpose here, at least for most of us, isn't simply just to be on a mountain transmitting God's love into the ether. I've no doubt that some are called to do just that, and I'm sure they benefit us all. Perhaps they even benefit us more than anyone lost in any kind of other activity at all. That said, for me and many others like me, we are called into purpose where ego energy and even ego strength are a requirement. So how does one balance the ego's imbalanced and trickster energy into a landscape of awakening and presence domination? How does the ego healthfully come to the party? Healthfully come to the party. We've all seen those movies where one character is a crook or an outlaw, and the other character is perhaps the cop in charge of looking after him or making sure he doesn't escape. You know that movie. What's that movie called? Comments below. But then an even worse criminal attacks them on some journey somewhere, and the cop character is forced to remove the handcuffs and even give the con man a gun to help fight off the real bad guys. There's a bunch of movies like that, right? The newly engaged con man can't fully be trusted by the cop, but he has no choice in the situation but to engage him in the present battle. We in the audience of the film, that is, know that the con man is secretly a good guy and can be trusted, and there's always a scene where the con man does something heroic to save the good guy's life, earning trust completely. Perhaps the ego isn't coming to jump in front of any bullets or save anyone's life in this scenario, but outside of that, this analogy is a great one for me. I love this analogy. I think this is a good analogy. Your ego is like that bad guy that you're escorting from one jail to the other, but right in the middle of it, real bad guys attack you, and you're forced to take the handcuffs off the ego and have him engage. This to me is what it's like when you are presence-based and you're inviting the healing light and love of God into your being, and he's doing the work of healing you within. The ego comes back into the fold so you can do purpose-driven tasks that require egoic strength, which they're still out there. It's not dominant, but it is a force that exists. Let's see, perhaps the ego, so without purpose and left in the dark, without the light and love of presence shining on it, an ego is a catastrophic force. An engine of evil even, left to its own devices, housing total control over one's identity, your ego is a bad time. You could equate an ego as an unloved child left in a home alone, surrounded by candy-flavored booze in a room full of proverbial guns and flammable objects, when this is the state. When presence isn't around at all and one is fully in an ego identity, there's going to be hell to pay. In short, absolute destruction and misery and an environment of hell on earth is guaranteed. But insert a perfect and loving parent into the equation and you have a different beast altogether. The parent, the loving, perfect parent in this equation is God or light or presence, whatever you feel most comfortable as your descriptive force in this situation. It doesn't mean that you ever let him get behind the wheel of the car of your life, but that said, he's helpful sitting in the back seat and coming along for the ride. In a performance situation, and knowing he needs to behave himself, knowing he's not in charge, I can put him in charge of the technical aspects of the show. Hey, ego, play the guitar for me. Hey, ego, hit the right notes. And dance on the foot pedals in the right time, make my loops and whatnot, get all technical with it. And then allow the light of presence or the real soul of love to fill those activities and actually transmit an essential energy in spirit to the crowd. So it's those two engines running alongside each other. And this is what I love about this, because we often think about, oh, I'm presence-based or, oh, I'm ego-based. And in order to get presence-based, you have to eliminate and defeat the ego entirely. And I think that's true initially when you're just sort of transitioning into a presence-based identity. There goes a cool boat. Wow, it's coming out of my head. Wow, is there another one? No. Okay. Yeah. So, but when I really think about it, they work as partners, especially in terms of, you know, things that require lots of skill and effort and being a performer. I mean, yes, you can be mostly locked into presence. Obviously, you want to be transcendent up there, but performance energy does require some ego involvement, and that's the point I think I'm trying to make here. Always keep an eye on the phantom hands, however, of the old ego. Make sure he doesn't reach for the gun of control. But this is no big deal. And what the pre-show breathwork, tapping, and meditation session is for, yeah, it's to remind him of who's in control. A kind of internal meeting, an invitation, an invocation of light and love to clarify roles and remind everyone who is in charge of what. The ego doesn't need to disappear. I wouldn't even call him a necessary evil, because he ceases to be evil in the love of God's light shining within. He becomes the outlaw hero in a way, knowing he's not a hero at all. All right, so that's part one. I'll go on to part two. This is going to be maybe a long one. I hope it's not too boring. I thought it was interesting, and maybe interesting to read it to you guys and comment in between. So this becomes a microcosm for the greater landscape of our lives upon awakening. And the deeper one identifies with presence, and the more its healing light can sanctify the whole machine within. The more the ego just becomes right-sized, or like a rescue dog that was vicious and brutalized by fear and abuse in a previous existence, but now is brought into a loving family and properly cared for, and it becomes increasingly less skittish and more loving. Yeah, so the ego ain't all bad guys. All of its old tricks of domination could thrive in the dark, and were even an impossible force to overcome. He enjoyed his domination and being a broken king in the kingdom called insanity. It was a fun ride for him in those days, if by fun you mean absolute hell. And yet, still, his grift was aligned with demonic principality. See, the ego, in this case, once presence becomes the dominant force, it doesn't no longer needs to be a force of pure evil. If presence is not on board, the ego most certainly is a force of evil. The nature of evil becomes his nature, but that was the environment he was helpless to overcome. His domination became his primary objective, allowing him to rule in darkness. He knew that forgiveness and actual love and light were threatening forces to his state of control, so he kept the mind active with thoughts and schemes. He provoked conflict wherever possible. So yes, someone firmly ensconced in egoic identity is going to create lots of conflict, lots of drama. They're going to have a busy, busy mind. The mind is always going to be thinking about something, and there's drama will surround them. And it's not their fault. It's a hella annoying, but it ain't their fault, because they're just in control. They're under the control of the ego, and that's just the ego's nature. The ego knows forgiveness is threatening to him. So in the light of awareness, his motivations and methods of control are obvious. This all is obvious from the light of awareness, and even childishly laughable, almost cute, if not for the actual evil and destruction that that sort of state of mind propagates, if not for the countless damned and ravaged lives lost in their wake, never even touching their potential for love. And that's the sad part about it, is if you don't wake up from the ego, you've lost so much potential at unifying with actual love and actual light. As I write this, or as I wrote it, because I wrote it today on the train, when this was at the train station, Stand By Me plays in the restaurant. Stand by me, oh, stand by me. Darling, whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? So that song was playing in the train station. The beautiful strings swell, the string section. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me, the singer sings. This song encapsulates the potential of our loving nature to beautifully offer our light and our grace and our mercy that really only can come as a conduit from Him up there, if we can ever manage to override the ego's domination. An ego imagining himself to be loving is anything but, and even laughable. It's not in his nature to transmit love. That's not where love comes from. It doesn't come from our egos, amigos. Love comes from on high. Love comes from presence. And there's plenty of it. But it's coming from a source external to the small parts of who we think we are. Love can only be transmitted in the ego's absence, riding in the back seat away from the actual outlaws. A room can be locked in darkness for 1,000 years, and darkness can seem like it's all that there is. But it's as simple as opening a door into the sun or lifting a previously permanent blind where the light floods in and reveals the darkness' illusionary nature. Sitting in the bright room, it's hard to even recall absolute darkness as real at all. We, after all, are sitting in a room now whose light source is overwhelming and much more obvious than any closed door or sealed window. When you've had the gift of opening up to the source of light, you can't help but think of others sitting in rooms of permanent darkness, wanting to help them simply open the door, y'all. Just open the door. Open the door to forgiveness and presence and see your ego for what it is. Singing and performance then becomes an occasion to reveal cracks, to help the conduit of light into dark rooms, to be a beacon of eternal light, inviting love into other people's deserted existence, or to bounce against others who have perhaps awakened their consciousness, so that light hits light and becomes unified as one. In its best, a performance is an occasion for many to come together as one, where we can shine a collective light back into the eye of the Father, sending Him a signal that our love can be blinding as well. So that was very long. I hope you stayed there for some of it. And I just think it's interesting, the dynamic of, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this. Like, I've heard people describe non-dualistic states where they become pure being consciousness and transcend everything. But where, once we have our purpose, once we get our purpose from source or from presence, then where does the ego fit in? Because, you can say thoughts are evil or ego identity is evil, but I believe what really happens is that aspect of ourselves heals through the sort of continual work of presence. And when it heals, it no longer has the ability to dominate, but it's still there. It's still, like, thoughts still come, obviously, and it's required for certain things, and so what I find interesting is it becomes like a cool friend. It becomes that con man that you were taken to another prison, but somebody else attacked you, your need for purpose, and you had to take the cuffs off and trust him, and he actually was trustworthy. So there you have it. That's my performance philosophy. I hope you understood it. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think in the comments below. If you have a performance philosophy or a way that you balance spirit and ego that might be interesting. Peace.